Thank you very much, Mr. Gupta. And first of all, thank you very much for your kind invitation. So I may give you special thanks to General Dahlia and Your Excellency. Okay, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. This is my first time here in India, and I'm very happy to enjoy, Indian food as much as possible because Indian food in Korea is not that cheap. So I try to enjoy more in the remaining days. Okay, and today I'm very happy to convey the real East Asian real voice to you today. So I'm the only person to make the physical presentation here. So my presentation will be focused on the implication of the Middle Eastern instability on the energy security in Korea, and then I try to make some kind of comparison of the Korean government policies before and after the Arab Spring. So what kind of changes Korea government showed in terms of energy security of the Middle East. Okay, the first slide. So, where Korea, where is Korea now in terms of energy? So, as you know, Korea has developed its economy over the last several decades so fast, and then it means our energy consumption also they tripled or became 4 times than many years ago. So now the size of Korea is what? It is a little bit bigger than UAE. So with the 15 million population, it's a very small country. But can you imagine Korea is world's 8th energy consumer, largest energy consumer out of more than 200 countries in the world, and then Korea is the 5th largest importer of crude oil worldwide. And finally, Korea is the 2nd largest importer of both gas and coal, some liquefied natural gas basically from mainly Russia and other areas. So the energy consumption in Korea is very huge, in terms of is the size of the country. Can you look at this graph? So the total energy consumption of South Korea comes from more than 45% from petroleum, 27% from coal, 14% from natural gas, and nuclear occupies 14%. And then renewable energy only occupies just 1%. So means what we are heavily dependent on fossil fuels. So that's why we have lots of energy security issues. As I mentioned, 86% of our energy consumption comes from fossil fuel, and no oil and gas reserves. There's no oil and gas at all in Korea, and means we should be absolutely dependent on oil and gas coal imports. And there's no pipeline at all. As you know, if you see in our the map, our geography is surrounded by seas. It's peninsular, 3 sides of our country surrounded by sea, and then to the north there's North Korea. Okay, there's no outlet at all. So there's no pipeline at all. It means what? Again, it's total reliance on tanker shipments of LNG or crude oil. And from where? As you know very well, 74% of oil coming from the Middle East. So Saudi Arabia was the leading supplier. If you look at some next, okay, and a quarter of total oil imports comes from Saudi Arabia. Okay, if I aggregate all the Middle Eastern, suppliers, more than 74% comes from the Middle East. So we are totally dependent on, so absolutely dependent on Middle East oil. And this is, situation of Korean, the energy consumption or, some imports. demand and supply. And then, so what were the some major some the policies, our government policy towards such kind of some energy security or energy issue? So I'm talking about before the Arab Spring. Okay, before the Arab Spring. So in 2008, so our Ministry of Knowledge, Economy, has publicized the national first national energy plan. It includes first one, efficient energy consumption. It's common sense, right? Decrease of dependence on oil. Again, development of new and renewable energy. Every country has the same policies. And the increase of nuclear power. This is kind of very unique, in terms of Korea, 14%, as I mentioned, of our energy, comes from some nuclear power. So at that time, our government emphasized. And then from this, point of view, we are very, very eager to have the contract with the UAE in building, some nuclear reactors. Actually, we finally succeeded in, having the contracts. And then there's the parentheses at the bottom. The diversification of energy suppliers is, as somebody mentioned before, some is our traditional one. So we try to avoid, over dependence on Middle Eastern oil, and building strategic partnership with the suppliers. For example, UAE, after we got the the nuclear the reactor building contract with UAE, we are trying to we have established partnership relations with the UAE. So such kind of diplomatic efforts is another size of our some energy policies. So this is already existing our energy policies even before the Arab Spring. And then I'm talking about then what was the what are the implications of the current Middle East turmoils to Korea? So our government has huge concern about after the Arab Spring. About the first one is safety of Korean forces in Lebanon. Okay, our Korean forces is now participating as some UN peacekeeping forces in Lebanon. And then safety of Korean workers in the Middle East. For example, even in Iraq, just 2 months ago, there were about more than 1,000 Korean workers working in Iraq. And okay, so now in Libya we actually withdraw all the some businesses from Libya, but 1 month ago there's 1,400 Korean workers were in Libya. So such kind of safety of Korean people is one of the concerns of our government, and more concern comes from economically speaking. So after the Arab Spring, can you see the Egypt? Okay, in 2010, the volume of trade between Korea and Egypt was more than $3 billion. Now it's less than $50 million. Yes. How about Libya? Before our withdrawal, we have some more than $10 billion of construction projects. So last month, August, our government decided to withdraw all companies, all people. How about Syria? In 2010, we have a trade volume with Syria $1.4 billion. Now, none. How can you make a trade with Syria now? How about Iran? Before the sanctions, the Korean sanctions against towards Iran, we have $16.5 billion of trade with Iran. Now is less than $5 billion. So there's a huge the negative impact from the Middle East turmoil. And one thing more, security of energy supply. If it didn't happen until now, fortunately, maybe if there's a more serious conflict, there's some very serious problems in energy supply. So Middle East turmoil has lots of and very serious implications on Korean government, Korean people and Korean economy. Next one. So what can we see? Some our some energy policies after the Arab Spring. I should test your memory. Some the memory capability. Okay, can you see these? I will show the before the Arab Spring. Okay, I'm going to show you again now. What have changed? Nothing. I'm sorry, almost nothing. Okay, I put some if you second line from the bottom. So increase of electricity generated by some the nuclear power is not publicly some the mentioned by the government nowadays after the Fukushima incident. But anyway, it's one of our main pillar of energy policy. And same thing, finally some diversification or something like that. But our government hasn't done anything about that after the Arab Spring. Yes, did something. Our government did something. The first thing is what there's a new law, gives some incentives to the importers, the oil importers, if they buy oil from non-Middle Eastern countries, the government will compensate the transportation fee, transportation cost. It's a huge measure. It's a very drastic measure. Yes, and second one is our government has dispatched Prime Minister to Saudi Arabia to get promises to have more, some stable or continuous oil supply, even though there's some kind of some more serious political problems. This is the added one. So basically what I want to say our the energy policies or the Middle Eastern the energy security, our governments or our some business circles responses and and attitudes are very passive, not proactive, not assertive, right? And why is that? Why passiveness happens? First one, generally speaking, there's a tacit recognition. There's a very well-known perception that we talked about it yesterday about who is the real actors, new actors, okay, new players, something like that. So our government and people believe that South Korea, unlike the United States, Russia, and China, has not have had leverage in the Middle Eastern affairs. We are not the important players in the Middle Eastern affairs, and this kind of perception is originating from various some reasons and background. First one is the security issue. Okay, so our government has the priority, very clear priority on the security issues surrounding the Korean Peninsula. That our more than 10% of our GDP is allocated for our defense budget to protect ourselves from the North Korean threat. So we don't have, and then we are surrounded by China, Japan, Russia, and remotely United States. So these countries are the major priorities. Professor Mina mentioned yesterday, the West Asia is the third priority of the Indian foreign policies, but some Middle East is, I don't know, fifth or sixth. I don't know. It's not. Even in comparison with India, it's not the major priority areas in Korea. And then there's another one is direct or indirect U.S. influence. For example, in January 2012, the Robert Einhorn, the State Department Special Advisor for Non-Proliferation and Arms Control, visited Seoul suddenly in the beginning of 2012 to pressure South Korea to reduce the some import of Iranian oil and they participate in some international sanctions against Iran. So such kind of so that after the 9/11, our government involuntarily, not voluntarily, dispatched our troops to Afghanistan, to Iraq, right? So such kind of some pressures from our some major allied country. This is one of the another some the background, and then after the Arab Spring, there's a relative stability of the Gulf countries. So our construction, our some the plantation, business about some the 80 more than 85% of our some construction in the Middle East has been focused on the Gulf countries. As I showed the some graph, our some the oil imports comes from mainly from the Gulf countries, including Iran and Iraq, right? So it's not the some this one has contributed to the passiveness of our government some policies, and another one is our some the business style. Some we have some many the oil companies in Korea, mainly 5 or 6 major oil companies in Korea, but they normally works on retail sale and reprocessing of reproduction of petrochemical. They don't have any interest in production overseas. Normally what they do is import oil and process it, and they sell some the gasoline to the people, and then some petrochemical products outside. So it means what some they don't have some very high stake or some interest in the some Middle Eastern oil themselves. And another reason, another background is low capability of aggressive investment. So our some the normally some overseas energy investment has been done by the Korean national oil companies and Korean gas corporations. But these two government some the corporations that didn't have that doesn't have don't have enough some the some what capital to invest outside. Yet actually we have some participate in Ambar gas development project, but it's gone always. And then our government invested some money in Kirkuk in northern Iraq. Kirkuk some oil field development. It's producing a little bit nowadays. And then we are so having some kind of cooperation with Gazprom, with some Russia, and we have bought some equity from the what some the North Sea some the oil field, but some the in comparison with the other some the what OECD countries some our investment is very small. As I mentioned some the our budget 10% of our budget goes to the our in defense, so we don't have enough capability to so invest aggressively for the some overseas oil fields, and that's why we don't possess some the very huge some the oil fields in the Middle East. So that's why so we are not very assertive in Middle East security or energy policies. And finally, all the business circle and even our government some decision makers knows very well about the traditional monopoly of the Middle Eastern oil and armed industry by the Western countries. It's very difficult to penetrate such kind of some wall. Our government has tried to export T-50 trainer jet during the last many years. We haven't have any positive result except Iran. We have made a contract of about $2 billion of some T-50 trainer jets, but otherwise it's very difficult to penetrate into Iran. Yes. So there are very strong monopoly. So as for the Korean companies, it's very difficult to penetrate such kind of some monopoly barrier. So that's why such kind of passiveness, non-assertiveness are some prevail in our energy policy or in our in energy security issues. So what do we have? We basically have 3 options. The 3 options is not very exclusive each other. But the first one is disengagement. Okay, it's very it's a risky area, so we should disengage ourselves. The basic example is Libya. Now, as I told you, we withdraw every workers, every project, every companies now, right? So, and another one is the opportunity exploitation. So one of the best example is in Iran. We started sanctions against Iran, and then we have more the more some the promises from Saudi Arabia to supply oil more some smoothly. So this is kind of some the opportunity exploitation. But the third option, this is our traditional one, okay, and most probably even in the future, what is it? Sitting on the political fence, just doing economic business. So this is our main option. This is not voluntarily, but something that our environment, political or security or economic environment, has some the forced us to follow this option. So that's why, unfortunately, our some the policy toward the Middle Eastern affairs and even energy security has been passive, not very assertive. Okay, thank you very much.